Before I start this video, I just want to say that I no longer have any affiliation with the NRA. I have no contact with them for over a year now, and I have no knowledge about what is currently going on at the NRA. However, from 2013 to early 2019, I was an NRA commentator and a host of the show NOIR and CN Live on NRATV. I'm also a massive Dave Chapelle fan, and I think Chappelle is one of the greatest comics to grace our planet. I said all of that so that you can have some context to help you determine how biased I may or may not be after you watch this video. On June 11, 2020, Netflix published a YouTube video of a Dave Chapelle stand-up routine where he said this.
These are our people. These are our countrymen. If I were white and saw one of these men get murdered and I was in the NRA, why wouldn't I stand up for them? A card-carrying legal gun owner that gets murdered in cold blood because he's black. That's why they don't give a fuck. There's only one time the NRA ever supported an assault weapon ban. You know when it was? It was when the Black Panthers stormed the state capitol with assault rifles in California.
First, let's clarify a few things. The NRA has never supported an assault weapons ban. When the Black Panthers marched on the Capitol, they had shotguns, bolt-action rifles, and M1A carbines, not assault weapons. And the law that Dave is referring to was not an assault weapon ban. It was the Mulford Act of 1967, which was a ban on openly carrying firearms in public. All that being said, yes, the NRA at the time not only supported the bill, they helped draft it. Prior to the Mulford Act, California was an open carry state. This meant that it was legal in California to carry a weapon in public so long as it was not concealed and there was no round in the chamber.
The California Penal Code section 12020 through 12027 and also the Second Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
After the controversial death of Denzel Duell, a man who was shot and killed by the police under questionable circumstances, the Black Panther Party began conducting what they called police patrols.
In early 1967, the Black Panthers organized armed patrols through the poorest neighborhoods of Oakland, California, an act that some call the beginning of the modern gun rights movement.
We would get out of the cars, we would walk up to the scene. Those who had rifles would carry them in the open, clearly visible.
We would stand at a distance where the police couldn't say they were interfering with their arrest or their detention of the individual, and make sure that there was no brutality.
The police were confronted by citizens who were not just voicing their opinions, but were armed.
Whether they are Democrat or Republican, the government is always looking to gain power. That is why the Founding Fathers wrote the Bill of Rights as a list of things the government can't do as opposed to a list of things they can do. And as you can probably guess, the idea of a group of men with guns policing the police didn't sit too well with the powers that be.
But these Black Panthers showed up some weeks ago at the airport to meet the Betty Chavez, the widow of Malcolm X, carrying the same things, and the only thing we could find to book them on then, and we couldn't book them, was if they had a live round in the breech and they were transporting guns around in automobiles. I submit to you it's preposterous in this urban society that we have in California, when we're fishing through the Fish and Game Code and looking at municipal fire ordinances to try and prevent people from carrying weapons around in an excited and hostile atmosphere. That scene over there yesterday, there were Cub Scouts milling around, there were children up to picnic with the governor. When this group met Saturday in Richmond, we took aerial shots of them from a helicopter, and the meeting is, they sealed off a block in Richmond with armed guards at each corner and with riflemen on the roof. In the midst of this meeting, and the pictures show it, there were children out on bicycles playing. You know, and I think we've listened to these people who are afraid of some kind of bureaucratic takeover of arms. We've got to emphasize again that no one wants to touch the legitimate hunter, but we've got to protect society from nuts with guns.
In response to the Black Panthers using guns to police the police, Republican legislator Don Mulford introduced a bill to repeal the law that permitted citizens to carry loaded weapons in public places. Keep in mind, this bill was co-sponsored by 3 Democratic legislatures as well. Then in response to the introduction of this bill, the Black Panthers decided to march on the California state capitol with their guns to protest the Mulford Act.
At the time, California law permitted citizens to carry loaded weapons so long as they were visible. when the state legislature took up a bill to prohibit individuals from carrying loaded weapons, the Panthers, heavily armed, entered the state capitol to demonstrate for their right to bear arms.
We went to the legislature to protest the gun law that was being debated at the time, and we felt that if there was a right to bear arms under the Second Amendment, then we should have a right to bear arms.
I can say without a doubt that it was this March that all but guaranteed that the Mulford Act would not only pass, but make it pass faster, as Bill AB 1591 was made an urgency statute under Article 4, Section 8D of the Constitution of California after an organized band of men armed with loaded firearms entered the Capitol. The bill passed the democratically controlled Assembly with a 2/3 majority and passed the also democratically controlled Senate 29 votes to 7 and was then signed into law by then Governor Ronald Reagan. So the question remains, was the Mulford Act racist? Well, it was the 1960s, and that wasn't exactly a time known for their racial tolerance. But according to Don Mulford, it wasn't racially motivated.
Mr. Mulford, your bill, you held your bill back to strengthen it. What do you have in mind?
Well, first, it's my intention to make it a felony to bring a loaded weapon into the state capitol. I think that the incident points out that shockingly that the laws are inadequate, but also serves to emphasize the fact that the laws are inadequate to protect the innocent public when bands of armed people, and let me make it perfectly clear, this has nothing to do with any racial incident, because in my testimony yesterday there were 5 white groups I discussed and 1 Negro group, but when bands of armed people with loaded weapons can move about our streets intimidating and frightening citizens, then I think we should act, and we intend to act.
There's also a letter written to Don Mulford to Ronald Reagan that says in part that the Black Panther movement was creating a serious problem and that the bill was introduced at the request of the Oakland Police Department. He goes on to say that he can't help feeling that the people of California are concerned about individuals armed with loaded weapons walking the streets of our communities in numbers. This sounds awfully familiar to the same anti-gun rhetoric that we hear today from our anti-gun politicians about people open carrying today. As for the NRA's motivation, I can only go off what they said at the time. On May 3rd, 1967, the NRA published the article, "Who Guards America's Homes?" The NRA got a lot of backlash from this article. In this article, the NRA talks about civil unrest and how recent upticks in civil unrest will strain not only the police, but the National Guard to such a degree that it will require citizens to be their own first responders, protectors of their homes and communities. I've read the article. It literally sounds like any one of the videos I've done during this pandemic. However, this didn't stop white vigilante extremist groups from using articles like this to justify their cause. And as a result, people started linking the NRA with extremist groups. The NRA openly rejected these groups, and after several NRA members were linked to other extremist groups, the NRA went so far as to make it a requirement to oppose extremism before joining the NRA. They even wrote several press releases denouncing armed extremism and vigilantism. But the NRA never excluded anyone from the organization based on their race or color. At the time, the Black Panthers were a new group. They weren't really known nationally until they marched on the state capitol with guns, which had never been done by any group ever. So California lawmakers were terrified, and were even more terrified when they realized it was legal for the Black Panthers to do this. For all they knew, the Black Panthers were there to kill people, so they freaked out and rammed the Mulford Act through. Everyone was overreacting at this time.
The head of the Black Panthers, Mr. Huey Newton, said that this is a punitive thing, again done by the white race to the black race. Do you feel that that's true, that the conspiracy charges are punitive?
Well, at least debatably or arguably so, if only in view of my original information that they were going to file misdemeanors when I first called and inquired, and then hours later, or the next day, which is today, it's decided to aggravate the charge or increase the charge for the same act. It might appear in a way that they could be making a mountain out of a molehill, and I say this without attempting to minimize of anything which the men may have done. It may be argued that they took extreme measures to protest a pending law, but here again, two wrongs not making a right, it might appear that the other side is now taking extreme measures to punish a measure which was essentially, I think, essentially was a civil rights protest.
There are a good number of people who believe the NRA is racist because they believe that the first and only time the NRA supported any type of gun control law was when black people, i.e. the Black Panthers, exercised their Second Amendment rights. However, this is not true. The NRA of that time had a well-documented history of not only supporting, but helping to write a multitude of gun control laws well before either the Mulford Act or the Black Panthers ever existed. This might confuse a lot of people considering how hard the NRA of today fights against gun control. But you have to view the NRA the same way you view Miley Cyrus, Hannah Montana, and Miley Cyrus, I Came In Like a Wrecking Ball. Same people, totally different personalities. One is sweet, nice, and passive and wants to look reasonable to the world, while the other is in your face and unapologetically non-compromising. If you ask me, I prefer the latter. The NRA was founded by two Union Civil War veterans and a former New York Times reporter in 1871. They started the NRA because the Civil War proved that the Northerners couldn't really shoot or handle guns that well, and that the Civil War went on longer than it needed to because of this very reason. So they formed the NRA stating that they wanted to promote and encourage rifle shooting on a scientific basis. The NRA of that time, up until the 1960s, was a glorified gun group focused on sports shooting and hunting. So basically, they were a bunch of fuds, old fuds, not the new ones. Hell, in 1939, Carl T. Frederick, the president of the NRA at the time, testified before Congress stating, "I have never believed in the general practice of carrying weapons. I do not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted only under licenses." Now, ask yourself, does that sound like the NRA of today? Keep in mind, the NRA is over 140 years old. They've been around since the time of slavery. So yeah, there is an exceedingly high chance that throughout its over 100 plus years of existence, at one time or another, the NRA had some full-blown racists in their leadership, which would be the case for just about any organization, company, or party that existed for that long. So that's not really saying much. For nearly a century, the NRA was willing to compromise on gun control laws, giving up a little here and a little there to seem reasonable. Then, the summer riots of 1967 and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. happened, which caused Congress to enact the Gun Control Act of 1968, where they tried to mandate a national registry of all guns and a license for all gun carriers. The NRA didn't go full Super Saiyan anti-gun control, but they blocked that part of the 1968 Gun Control Act. It was also during this time that for the first time ever, there were talks about banning handguns outright.
The Panthers were disarmed when then-Governor Ronald Reagan signed a new state gun control law. The U.S. Congress followed suit by passing the 1968 Gun Control Act. The legislation denied weapons to felons, minors, and the mentally ill. This new effort to regulate guns was bipartisan. Even the Nixon White House called for new regulations. But an old player with a new focus was now on the scene.
The anti-gun movement, if you will, was ecstatic at that time. They thought they were on a roll. What they didn't realize was that they had managed to wake up gun owners, sportsmen, hunters, and the like in this country in a way that they hadn't had to be wakened before.
The National Rifle Association had shifted its 100-year-old priorities from hunting and conservation to gun rights.
We had to take this fight because there was nobody else in the country that could do it. And that was the emergence of what some call the new NRA, the NRA that's seen very visibly as the champion of the Second Amendment.
Fast forward to 1977, when at this time Harlan Carter was the head of ILA, which is the NRA's lobbying arm. Harlan was a staunch, unrelenting, every gun laws and infringement Second Amendment type supporter. This created a divide in the leadership of the organization. There were your NRA leaders who wanted the organization to only focus on sports shooting and hunting, and then there were your leaders who wanted to take a hardline Second Amendment stance like Harlan Carter. A lot of people don't realize that the NRA annual meetings is where a lot of the leadership decision making takes place, and that NRA Life members can vote on the leadership structure of the NRA. During the annual meetings of 1977, over 200,000 NRA Life members voted to make Harlan Carter the leader of the NRA, and the NRA has been a hardline 2A political advocacy group ever since. Currently, Wayne LaPierre is the head of the NRA, and it was under his tenure that I spent the years of 2013 through early 2019 as an NRA commentator and a host of the show NOIR and CN Live. From my time there, here's what I learned. The NRA is a big ass organization with a very big board, and there are times where the leadership doesn't agree on what direction the organization should go. That being said, do I think the NRA cares about black gun owners? I got my law degree from a historical black university. I minored in African American studies in college, had racial epithets yelled at me in high school, been called a sellout, coon, Uncle Tom, etc., etc. My radar for racism is pretty fine-tuned. In all of my time with the NRA, I never once got the impression that they cared about black gun owners less. If anything, they went out of the way to avoid looking like they were cheapishly pandering to one race or the other, which I can respect. While I was there, I was one of the most visible personalities on their platform, and they gave me leeway to do things like this while I was there. My shows on NRATV have been going strong for years. We've taken anti-gun black women out to shoot for the very first time to show them the importance of the Second Amendment. We've flown a black woman across the country just to teach her the importance of firearm training to defend herself. I've had sit-down conversations with black men about how to improve the image of black gun ownership in this country. I've gone to the inner cities of Dallas to speak with a young black teen about his experience in not only the neighborhoods, but the educational system, and expressed to him the importance of the Second Amendment for African Americans from a historical perspective. We've spoken with black politicians who were politically Democrats, but understood the importance of the Second Amendment for the black community. We've had a conversation with the president of NAGA, National African American Gun Association, to bring attention to the important work they're doing for black guns. We've made countless videos about the violence in the inner city and how the people that need guns the most are the good, hardworking people in the inner city. We've had countless conversations with Maj Toure, the leader of Black Guns Matter, a program that goes from inner city to inner city, training blacks in those cities on the fundamentals of firearms and firearm ownership. Hell, Dana Lash, the woman in the NRA ad, narrated a 10-minute mini documentary about gun control's racist history and how it disproportionately affected black minorities in this country. Who came to the aid of Josephine Byrd when her housing project wouldn't allow her to own a gun for her protection? The NRA. Who came to the aid of Shaneen Allen, the black single-parent mother of 2 in New Jersey, who was being tried for a felony conviction just for mistakenly driving across the New Jersey Bridge with a gun she had a legal Pennsylvania concealed carry permit for? The NRA. Who came to the defense of Otis McDonald, an elderly black man who had to sue the city of Chicago because he felt he needed a gun to shield his family from gangs and drug dealers that terrorized his neighborhood? The NRA. Hell, the NRA shooting range in Washington, D.C. was one of the few public places in the city that was not racially segregated back in the 50s. Now, I will say, I do think the messaging from the NRA can be a little tone deaf at times, and that they err on the side of caution a little too much when it comes to speaking on issues like the Philando Castile case. Granted, while I was there, I did a video about Philando Castile on their platform, and I wrote an open letter about my opinion regarding the case. Never did they ask me not to speak on the Philando case. There were 5 million NRA members, and there were no short of 8 million different opinions about the Philando Castile case. After my open letter, I was called a cop hater for even questioning the cops' decision-making in that situation, and learned that there were phone calls made to the NRA by NRA members saying how much they didn't like my open letter. The NRA never asked me to retract what I said or reprimand me for anything in any way. I'm the furthest thing from a cop hater, but that's just it. We live in a world now where nuance is underappreciated and replaced with broad feel-good confirmation bias, and anything you say will be used to destroy you if you say something someone remotely disagrees with. The NRA is one of the most hated organizations in the country. Anything they said would have been used against them. If they came out in favor of the cop, then they don't care about black people. If they came out in favor of Philando, then they don't care about cops. It's literally what happened to me. The only difference is I'm just one person. They're an organization with 5 million members. So I think they decided to play that case close to the chest and make a broad, neutral statement about the shooting being troubling. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't know what's going on at the NRA now. However, based on the information and facts I have now, I believe the NRA's support and help with the Mulford Act was more an attempt to distance themselves from what they believed to be extremist groups. The NRA existed during a time where blatant racism was perfectly acceptable, and yet out of the 140 years of existence, the most concrete piece of evidence we can find is them supporting one of many gun control laws in their exceedingly long history. Don't get me wrong, I understand why people feel this way based on the history of this country, but based on all the facts at hand, it's naive at best and intellectually dishonest at worst to say the NRA is racist simply due to their support of the Mulford Act. Right now, there's a culture war against the Second Amendment, which is why I need your help spreading our message to counter their message. You can help do this by leaving a comment, sharing this video, and clicking the bell and subscribe button. Let my voice be your voice, and let them know you want to keep America tactical, because the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. Also, if you're wondering where to purchase your AR-15s are essential, I will not comply. I am the militia. I lost all my guns in a boating accident, and your state-specific Keep America Tactical shirt, click the link next to my head or the link in the description section, or if you're watching this on a mobile device, tap the small triangle on the lower right-hand side of this video and click the link in the description.